a man invisible to everyone, until the alien billionaire saw him caring for the one she loved most. The planet was nothing like Earth. Two suns hung in the sky, casting the surface in a constant glow that felt both endless and fragile. Towering crystal structures shimmered in the distance, their sharp edges refracting light into colors no human language had ever named. The air itself hummed faintly, as though the world was alive, vibrating with energy. David Walker never thought he would end up here. Back on Earth, in the United States, he had been a janitor in schools and office buildings. An invisible man, someone whose presence was acknowledged only when the floors were dirty. Life had never handed him anything grand. But now, on this alien world, he swept the gleaming floors of an estate so large it could swallow entire American cities. And the owner of that estate was no ordinary employer. Her name was Serena Veyer, a billionaire by alien standards, descended from one of the most powerful dynasties of her people. Her skin was the shade of midnight sky after rain, deep blue, smooth, flawless. Her long hair, pure white, fell like a silver waterfall down her back, moving as though it carried a current of its own. She was intimidating, untouchable, the kind of presence that silenced rooms even when she said nothing. But what most didn't know, what only a few dared to whisper, was that her power and wealth meant nothing when it came to her son. His name was Cale. He was young, fragile, and confined to a wheelchair crafted of metal and crystalline energy. Unlike the other children of her kind, he could not walk, nor run, nor train in the ways of his people. He watched from the sidelines, his body weaker than most, his gaze sharper than anyone gave him credit for. He carried the same blue skin and white hair as his mother, but his eyes were softer, pools of deep violet filled with questions he couldn't ask aloud. Most alien caretakers avoided him. Some pitied him. Others thought tending to him was beneath their station. But David, an Earthman with no rank, no wealth, no title, saw only a child who needed kindness. That was how it happened. On an afternoon drenched in twin sunlight, Serena descended the crystalline stairs of her mansion. She was expecting silence, perhaps her staff standing rigid and formal, as they always did. But instead, she stopped cold at the sight before her. There, in the courtyard, Cale's chair had rolled across the polished obsidian tiles. The boy's hand trembled as he reached for a toy dropped on the ground, a small, intricate puzzle cube of alien design. Before he could strain further, David appeared. Not in a rush, not clumsy or loud. He bent down with quiet care, retrieved the cube, and placed it gently in Cale's lap. And then, something even stranger. David knelt to Cale's level. His voice was soft, steady, the way one would speak to their own child. "There you go, champ," he said, in English, though Cale's translator device picked up every word. "No worries. You don't ever have to struggle alone, all right?" Cale blinked. Most spoke to him in clipped tones, treating him as fragile glass. But this man, this Earthman, spoke as though Cale was strong. Serena's heart twisted in her chest. She had watched entire empires bow to her. She had witnessed rivals destroyed by her wealth, her wit, her sheer force of will. Yet, standing on those crystalline stairs, what she saw shook her far more than any political battlefield ever had. A human nobody, invisible to society, treating her son with more dignity and love than anyone in her empire ever dared. She should have dismissed it. She should have walked past, as though it meant nothing. But for the first time in years, Serena could not move. Something inside her had shifted. David never considered himself a threat to anyone. On Earth, he had been the man who held doors open, who swept gum from hallways, who passed unseen through the lives of thousands. But here, on Serena Veyer's world, his quiet presence began to draw eyes. The staff whispered, "Why does she keep him?" One alien attendant muttered in their own tongue, "A human? From that primitive planet. He should not be here." Worse, another sneered, "The child has grown attached to him." David felt the tension long before it was spoken aloud. He wasn't stupid. The sideways glances, the sudden silences when he entered a room, the way high-ranking officials looked through him as though he were dust, they told him enough. Still, he stayed, because Cale smiled when he was near. And for David, that was enough. But for Serena, the equation was not so simple. One evening, In the council chamber of her mansion, she sat at the head of a long, crystalline table. Around her, a dozen advisors from across her empire argued with restrained voices that carried venom beneath their courtesy. "This human compromises your standing," one said, his skin glowing faintly green under the chamber lights. "Already your rivals whisper that the great Serenia has lowered herself to keep Earth's trash in her halls." Another leaned forward. "And worse, he meddles with your heir. Do you want your son raised by one who doesn't even belong in our lineage? His influence will stain the boy." The words dug into Serenia, but she didn't let her face betray emotion. Only her eyes flickered toward Kale, who sat silently at her side, fiddling with his puzzle cube. David stood nearby, a shadow in the corner, clutching the mop handle he carried as though it were a lifeline. He didn't understand all the words. The alien tongue was still difficult for him, but he understood the tone. They didn't want him there. Later, when the council dispersed, Serenia found herself pacing the balcony that overlooked the twin sons. The weight of leadership pressed on her shoulders, heavier than any jewel or crown. Was it weakness to allow a human into her household? Was she letting her emotions override logic? Then she heard it. A small laugh. Kale's laugh. She turned to see David kneeling beside the boy's chair again, showing him a small trinket from Earth, a battered baseball he had kept since childhood. Kale's translator picked up David's words. "This ball flew further than I ever thought I could throw. Sometimes the smallest things can surprise you." Kale gripped the ball like treasure. His violet eyes glowed, brighter than Serenia had ever seen. And in that instant, her chest ached with something dangerous. Hope. But hope had a cost. Because in the shadows, one of her rival's emissaries watched the exchange with cold disdain. And as he slipped away into the corridors, Serenia knew this small act of kindness would ignite something far larger. A storm was coming, and at its center stood an Earth janitor, a boy in a chair, and a woman who had never allowed herself to feel. The first sign of danger came quietly. 2 nights after the council's meeting, the estate's security system flickered. For a world built on crystalline technology, failure was unthinkable. Yet doors that should have remained sealed unlocked themselves. Lights pulsed strangely, casting jagged shadows across the walls. David noticed it first. He had been scrubbing a corridor when the hum of the energy grids cut out, leaving silence so thick it made his ears ring. He turned his head just in time to see Kale's room door sliding open without command. Panic surged through him. Dropping the scrub brush, he ran, shoes slapping against the alien stone, faster than he had moved in years. Inside, Kale sat in his chair, clutching the Earth baseball tightly, eyes wide at the darkness creeping into his room. From that darkness stepped a figure cloaked in metallic armor, its eyes glowing like molten iron. Not a thief, not a servant, an assassin. David didn't think. He lunged forward, arms wrapping around the boy's chair, pulling it back as the figure reached out. The assassin's strike hit the floor instead, leaving a smoking scar across the crystalline tiles. "Kale, hold on," David shouted, shoving the chair into motion. The alien wheels glided faster than any Earth design, but the assassin followed within human speed. The alarms blared now, finally awake, but they were seconds too late. Serenia arrived at the far end of the corridor, her white hair glowing under the emergency lights, her skin casting shadows of cobalt fire. Her eyes widened at the sight, David pushing Kale's chair with all his strength, the assassin closing him behind. For a heartbeat, Serenia saw what others refused to see. Not a janitor, not a human intruder, but a man willing to throw himself between death and her son. With a cry that shook the walls, she unleashed her power. Crystalline shards erupted from her palms, slicing through the air in streaks of light. The assassin twisted, blocking most with a shield of metal, but one shard grazed his arm, tearing a hiss of pain from his throat. David pushed Kale into the safety of Serenia's reach just as the assassin turned his fury on him. The strike came too fast. David barely raised his arms before the blow connected, hurling him across the corridor. His back slammed against the wall, and the world blurred in white pain. "David!" Serenia's voice cut sharp with fear she had never allowed herself to show. Kale cried out, his translator stuttering to catch his words. "Stop! Don't hurt him!" The assassin hesitated, just long enough for Serena's second blast to catch him square in the chest. Energy crackled, metal split, and with a final snarl, the intruder vanished into a shroud of black mist, retreating into the estate's fractured security grid. Silence fell, broken only by the alarm's fading echo. Serena rushed to her son, cupping his face in trembling hands. He was safe, alive. But when she turned her gaze to David, still slumped against the wall, her throat tightened. Blood ran from his temple. His breath came shallow, ragged. Yet his eyes, unfocused and dim, sought Cale first. "You okay, champ?" he whispered. Cale nodded through tears. And Serena Veyer, who had faced down armies and negotiated with warlords without a flicker of doubt, felt something fracture inside her. Because she realized then that her empire had enemies not just outside, but within. Someone had sent that assassin. Someone in her circle wanted Cale gone. And the only one who had truly fought for her son was the human they all despised. The estate's halls were silent after the attack, yet that silence carried weight. It was not peace. It was the breath before a storm. David lay in the infirmary, his arms strapped, ribs bound, head wrapped with alien medical bands that pulsed faintly as they healed. He hated lying still. He was never good at that. But when he tried to rise, the machine scolded him with high-pitched warnings. Cale sat nearby, refusing to leave, the baseball resting in his lap like a talisman. His small hand reached out to hold David's, squeezing as if to keep him tethered to this world. Serena stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the pale glow of the healing lights. She had dismissed the medics. This was something she had to face alone. "You could have died," she said, her voice colder than the room's air. David blinked, tried to smile. "Better me than him." The words hit her like a blade. She had heard soldiers declare loyalty, politicians swear devotion, but none of it had sounded like this. Raw, unpolished, true. She stepped closer, the white of her hair gleaming under the lights. For years, she had built walls around herself, walls of wealth, of authority, of fear. But this human, this invisible man from a forgotten corner of the galaxy, had breached them with nothing but courage and decency. "Why?" she whispered, not to him, not even to herself, but to the universe. David's answer was simple: because no one else would. Cale's violet eyes widened. He understood more than adults gave him credit for. And in that moment, Serena saw the truth. Her son needed David, not because of what he could do, but because of who he was. But the danger was greater now. The assassin's attack was proof of betrayal inside her empire, and keeping David near Cale would only paint a larger target on both of them. The dilemma cut deep: protect the man who had saved her son, or send him away to shield them all from greater risk. Before Serena could decide, a transmission crackled across the estate's crystal comms. A voice slithered through the static, heavy with venom. "The boy is weakness. The Empire deserves strength. Next time, no human will stand in the way." The line went dead. Cale trembled. David clenched his jaw, ignoring the pain in his ribs. Serena's hands curled into fists. This was no longer about status or appearances. This was survival. And for the first time in her life, Serena Veyer knew she could not fight this battle alone. Her empire wanted her son broken. She wanted him whole. And in the human lying injured on her infirmary bed, she saw an ally she never expected. A decision formed in her heart. Dangerous, reckless, but undeniable. She would keep David by her side, not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as something far greater. And though she didn't dare name it yet, the truth glimmered like fire between them. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, for someone who risked everything just to protect what mattered, stick around. There are so many more twists in this story, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The next days unfolded under a heavy veil of tension. The attack had shaken the estate, but what came after was worse. Silence from the council. No investigation, no arrests, no acknowledgement. For Serena, that silence screamed louder than war drums. It meant the betrayal was deeper than she imagined. She doubled the guards around Cale's quarters, but no amount of soldiers eased the ache in her chest. Trust, once broken, could not be rebuilt with numbers. And yet, in the center of the storm, David refused to step back. Even with his ribs still sore and the bandages glowing faintly along his temple, he insisted on returning to his duties. He swept the floors, carried supplies, and, most importantly, stayed at Cale's side. The boy clung to him like a lifeline, smiling brighter than Serena had seen in years. But that bond came with cost. Rumors spread through the estate like wildfire. Servants whispered in corners. Courtiers smirked during formal dinners. They called David the pet human, the janitor lover, the stain in Serena's dynasty. Every whisper was meant to wound. One evening, during a gathering of high dignitaries, the mockery turned open. A rival lord raised a glass and said, loud enough for the hall to hear, "Is it true, Lady Veyre, that your heir's strongest guardian is not one of our warriors, but an earth cleaner with a mop?" The laughter was sharp, cruel, echoing through the crystalline hall. Serena's jaw clenched. Cale's small hands gripped the arms of his chair. But David, standing behind him, leaned down and whispered something only Cale could hear. Whatever it was, it made the boy laugh. And that laughter silenced the hall far more effectively than Serena's anger ever could. Still, when the guests left, Serena confronted David. "You don't understand what they'll do," she said, her voice low, urgent. "Every time you stand beside Cale, you invite their hatred onto him." David met her gaze. His eyes were tired, but unyielding. If their hatred's already here, then standing back won't change a thing. Her chest tightened. He was right, and she hated it. Because the truth was that David had become part of Cale's world in ways no alien tutor, no elite guard, ever could. To remove him now would be to tear away the light her son had finally found. But Serena knew the Empire would not sit idle. Already, she had received veiled threats. Already her rivals were whispering that Cale was unfit to inherit, that Serena was blinded by weakness. The attack had been only the beginning. And in the stillness of the night, Serena found herself staring at David through the glass walls of the estate's courtyard. He was showing Cale how to throw the baseball, slow, careful, guiding the boy's trembling hands with infinite patience. Cale laughed when the ball bounced back clumsily, and David laughed with him, as though nothing outside that courtyard existed. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying, because Serena realized then that she was no longer choosing between empire and affection. The choice had already been made in her heart. She wanted him here, and that meant she had everything to lose. The empire did not bend, but the household began to change. For weeks after the attack, David and Serena lived in an uneasy rhythm. She carried the weight of her empire, cloaked in strength and ice. He carried Cale through the days, lifting the boy's spirit with stories from Earth. Baseball games under floodlights, summers that smelled of cut grass, the sound of rain against windows. Cale drank in every word. His laughter filled corridors once silent. His questions, sharp, endless, pulled David into late nights, explaining constellations from Earth, comparing them to the twin suns above this alien world. And in those quiet hours, Serena began to see what her empire could not. She saw Cale straighten his posture when David encouraged him. She saw his hands steady when David placed the puzzle cube in them and whispered, "You can do it." She saw hope growing where there had only been resignation. For the first time, Serena dared to imagine her son's future not as tragedy, but as possibility. One evening, after the boy had fallen asleep, she found David still in the courtyard. He was leaning on his mop, gazing up at the alien sky with tired eyes. "You tell him stories of your world," Serena said, stepping beside him. "Why?" David shrugged. "Because he deserves to know he's not trapped. That there's more out there than people telling him what he can't do." His words struck her deeper than she expected. She thought of Cale, his chair, his fragile body. She thought of how often she had tried to protect him by building walls. Walls that only reminded him of what he lacked. "You speak as if you've known his struggle," she murmured. David's eyes didn't leave the sky. "Being invisible your whole life, it teaches you what it feels like when no one believes in you." Silence stretched between them. Serena studied his profile, the scars still faint on his temple, the strength in his jaw, the quiet resilience etched into his skin. And something dangerous stirred inside her. Not pity, not gratitude, something warmer, something that made her walls tremble. She tried to push it away. She was Serena Veyre, heir of empires. He was David Walker, a man who had scrubbed floors his whole life. Their worlds were not just distant, they were opposed. But when David finally turned to meet her eyes, she felt the ground shift. His gaze held no fear of her power, no awe of her wealth. Only truth. "Your son's strong," he said softly. "Stronger than anyone here gives him credit for. He just needs someone to remind him every day." Her throat tightened. She should have answered. She should have reasserted the distance between them. But the words never came. Instead, she realized something she could no longer deny. For years she had ruled through fear and respect. But standing there beside this invisible man, she felt something she had thought impossible. She felt seen. The storm Serena had feared finally came. It began with fire in the skies. Enemy ships, sleek, jagged vessels bearing the sigils of her rivals, descended through the twin suns, their weapons igniting the horizon in streaks of crimson. Sirens screamed through the estate as the shields struggled to hold. Inside, chaos erupted. Guards scrambled, servants fled, and counselors vanished in a shadow. But Serena knew the truth before the first blast struck her walls. This attack wasn't for her. It was for Kale. She raced through the corridors, white hair streaming behind her like a comet's tail, heart hammering against her ribs. The sounds of combat rattled through the halls, shattered glass, collapsing stone, screams cut short. And then she saw it. The assassins had returned, more of them this time, their armor gleaming with dark energy. At the center of the courtyard, Kale's chair spun helplessly as one of the invaders reached for him. But before their hand could close, David was there. He had no weapon but a steel rod torn from a broken railing. Yet in his grip, it became something more, an anchor, a promise. He swung with every ounce of strength, the blow cracking against the assassin's armor. Sparks burst, the sound echoing like thunder. "Stay away from him," David roared, his voice carrying through the chaos. Kale's eyes widened, tears brimming, as David planted himself between the boy and death itself. Every strike he made was desperate, clumsy compared to the assassin's precision, but it was fueled by something no training could replicate: love. The attackers closed in. David blocked one strike, then another, but a blade cut across his arm, leaving blood dripping onto the crystalline floor. He staggered, yet refused to fall. Serena arrived in a blaze of blue fire. Her power erupted in arcs of crystalline shards, tearing through armor, shattering weapons. She fought like a storm given flesh, unstoppable, unyielding, but even she could not be everywhere at once. David took another hit, collapsing to one knee. The assassins circled, sensing the end. And then Kale did something no one expected. With trembling hands, he clutched the baseball David had given him. He activated the small crystalline nodes built into his chair, a function Serena had forbidden him to use for fear of overstrain. Energy surged through the wheels, propelling him forward with a speed that shocked even the assassins. "Leave him alone," Kale shouted, his translator sputtering, but carrying the fury in his voice. The chair rammed into one assassin, toppling them backward. For the first time, Kale had fought back. The distraction was enough. Serena struck the others with a scream that split the night, her power tearing the courtyard apart in a rain of crystal and flame. The surviving assassins fled into the smoke, leaving only silence and ruin behind. Serena dropped to her knees beside her son, tears she had never allowed glistening on her blue skin. "Kale, you." Her voice broke. "You fought." Kale looked up at her, then at David, who lay bloodied but alive on the floor. "Because he showed me how," he whispered. Serena turned her gaze to David, her empire's enemy, her heart's truth, and she knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. They had won the battle, but the cost was written in blood, scars, and the certainty that war had only just begun. The courtyard was silent once more, though silence after battle never truly felt like peace. Smoke curled from shattered walls, shards of crystal crunched beneath boots, and the air smelled of scorched stone. Serena stood at the center of the ruin, her chest heaving, the glow of her power finally dimming. Around her lay the aftermath, guards carrying away the wounded, medics tending to scorched skin, and servants whispering about betrayal. But her focus was only on two figures. Kale, his small hands trembling on the arms of his chair, violet eyes still wet from tears. And David, lying on the ground, bloodied but breathing, clutching his broken steel rod like a soldier unwilling to surrender it. Serena moved first. She knelt beside Cale, brushing white strands of hair from his face. "You were brave," she whispered, her voice shaking in a way she despised. "Braver than I allowed myself to believe." Cale leaned forward. "I just didn't want him to die." His gaze flicked to David, and his grip on the baseball in his lap tightened. David groaned, forcing himself up onto an elbow despite the medics rushing toward him. "Kid's got more fight in him than all of us," he muttered with a faint smile. Serena's breath caught. Even bloodied, battered, half-conscious, David's first thought wasn't himself. It was Cale. Always Cale. The medics lifted him onto a stretcher of glowing crystal, but before they carried him away, Serena reached out. For the first time, she touched his hand. Human skin against alien blue. It was brief, yet it carried the weight of an oath. "Rest," she said firmly. "You've done more than anyone in this empire had the courage to do." David managed a weak grin. "Does that mean I finally get raised?" Against all logic, Serena laughed. "Just once. Soft, quick, but real." Later, as the fires died and the estate was sealed, Serena stood alone on her balcony, staring at the twin suns dipping toward the horizon. She replayed the battle in her mind, the fury in her enemy's strikes, Cale's defiance, David's stubborn refusal to die. Her empire was crumbling beneath betrayal. She could not trust her counsel. Her enemies would come again, but she no longer felt as alone as before. For the first time, she knew she had allies not bound by bloodlines or contracts, but by something stronger: choice. Cale had chosen to fight. David had chosen to stay. And she was beginning to choose them both. The days after the battle were unlike any Serena had lived before. Her empire was still vast, her enemies still circling like predators, yet her perspective had shifted. For years she had measured strength in power, in wealth, in the fear her name inspired. But now, walking through the estate's quiet corridors, she found herself questioning those old truths. Strength looked different now. It looked like Cale in his chair, gripping his baseball like a weapon of hope, violet eyes sharper than the blades raised against him. It looked like David, bruised and stitched, refusing to leave Cale's side, even when the medics warned him he needed rest. It looked like laughter returning to halls that had only known silence. One evening, Serena stood at Cale's bedside while he slept. His small hands clutched the ball, even in dreams. David sat slumped in a chair nearby, finally dozing, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Serena studied them both. A fragile human, a fragile child, and yet, together, they had stood against assassins, against ridicule, against the empire itself. And she realized something profound. Her son did not need to be molded into the image of alien perfection. He did not need to run or fight like others to have worth. His strength was already here, seen by a man the universe considered invisible. David Walker, janitor of Earth, had shown Cale what even she had failed to, that his life had value beyond titles or expectations. And to Serena herself, David had shown something equally dangerous, that beneath her armor, her crowns, her wealth, she was still capable of feeling, of caring, of loving. The thought made her chest ache. Love was weakness in her world, a liability her enemies would seize upon without mercy. And yet, as she looked at David's sleeping form, she felt no shame, only certainty. Perhaps weakness was the wrong word. Perhaps love was the only kind of strength that mattered. When Cale stirred in his sleep and whispered David's name, Serena closed her eyes. She knew the path ahead would not be easy. Rivals would return, or might follow. But no matter what came, one truth was unshakable. The Invisible Man had become impossible to ignore. And in his presence, Serena Veyer had discovered not weakness, but the courage to believe in something beyond survival. The twin suns rose over the alien horizon, painting the crystalline towers in shades of gold and violet. The estate, though scarred from battle, stood firm, and within its walls, something new had taken root. David Walker no longer felt invisible. His days were still filled with simple tasks, sweeping, mending, carrying supplies, but now they carried weight. When Cale laughed, When Serena's guarded eyes softened, he felt that his life was no longer a string of unnoticed days. He mattered. Cale had grown, too. His body was still fragile, but his spirit was not. With David's encouragement, he practiced daily, rolling faster, pushing his hands harder, even studying Earth's strange games. The baseball never left his side, a reminder that strength could come from unexpected places. Serena watched all this unfold with a heart she barely recognized as her own. She still carried the burdens of leadership, still faced enemies who plotted against her. But when she saw Cale smiling with David, something inside her healed. One evening, she found herself walking the courtyard where it had all begun. David stood there, Cale beside him in his chair, both laughing as the ball bounced awkwardly between them. Serena paused, just watching. For once, she allowed herself the luxury of simply being. Cale spotted her first. "Mother," he says, "next time, you have to play." David chuckled. "Yeah, I told him no excuses. Even billionaires get a turn." Serena almost smiled. Almost. Then, with a slow breath, she stepped forward. She picked up the baseball and held it in her blue hand, turning it over. Such a small, simple object, yet it had carried her son, her household, her own heart, into a future she hadn't dared to imagine. When she threw it, awkward, unpracticed, Cale's laughter filled the courtyard, bright and pure. David's, too. And in that sound, Serena heard the truth. Empires rise and fall, wealth fades, power shifts. But love endures. Her enemies would return. The battles were not over. But she no longer feared the future. She had Cale. She had David. And together, they were stronger than any empire. If this story touched you, if you believe in love that crosses worlds, in strength found in the most unexpected places, leave your thoughts below. Share your favorite moment. And subscribe for more stories of impossible bonds that change everything. Because sometimes, the invisible can become unforgettable.